Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Instagram Live conversation. Today I'm going to be talking with Eli Durst, and I'm going to just give him an invite right now. Hold on just a second. I turn you around so you can see his work while we wait. Oh, there he is. Hey, Eli.
Hey, Kevin.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just doing a quick pan around the project space so that people can have some frame of reference here about what
Nice.
we're going to be talking about. Eli, your work is called The Four Pillars, and it is on view through February 27th. So we've got about 2.5 weeks left. 2 weeks and a few days, I guess. There we are. So thanks for talking to me.
No, it's great to do this.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Um, so, Eli, could you just introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about, I'm going to turn around so we see your work in the background too.
Yeah. So I'm Eli Durst, photographer. Studied in grad school at the Yale School of Art, and now I teach at the University of Texas photography program within the College of Fine Arts. So I'm locally based. I make my own fine art photographs. I teach. I also do a fair amount of editorial work as well.
Nice. So for this series, can you just say what it's called again, and then talk about, what it's about?
Yeah. So this work is called The Four Pillars, and it's related to the work I was doing previously. I actually have my copy of my book over there. I just need to grab it. But so it's sort of an investigation of kind of different suburban communal spaces, thinking about questions of collective identity, social forces, social pressures that like animate, reinforce, produce, right, support kind of group dynamics. Whoops, sorry, that's my dog Judy. Um, and so thinking about questions of conformity, repression, shame, fulfillment, desire, fantasies, sort of different things like that.
Very all-encompassing. How do you try to fit everything into one series of work?
Yeah, I mean it's tricky because like you want to have something that is open-ended enough, right? That it allows you to be creative, it allows you to go places with it. Um, I feel like back in the like 80s, 90s, so much photography work was very serial. It was like, what's one idea? I'm going to reproduce that idea over and over again.
Hmm.
Um, and for me, that's not nearly as interesting as like giving myself um, a much broader scope to kind of play around with and make work about. But also, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew because then it can almost
Right.
feel like you can't really tackle what you need to.
Well, I'll say that this show feels very cohesive. You're a fantastic storyteller, and I'm going to just pan around again so people have a sense of what we're talking about. These images at first glance all feel very surreal and separate from each other, but they all do tie in nicely once you sort of investigate and spend time with them. You mentioned your book, The Community. Are you going to grab that?
Yeah, I got it right here.
Yeah, how does that tie in to this show?
Let me just put my phone down for a second. Sorry, there we go. So yeah, here's my book, The Community. It's published in May, last May. So the work, the four pillars very much grew out of the community. I mean, it's a very similar kind of, it's set in the same type of world. A lot of the spaces are similar, rec centers, church basements, community centers, kind of multi-purpose, very like ubiquitous, utilitarian kind of spaces, right, where people come together. So it very much grew out of that, but I would say the picture making itself changed a bit. The community is a little bit more indebted to like the language of documentary photography. It's not documentary photography by any means. It's a fictional world I'm building
Hmm.
in photographs of the real world. But I would say the picture making in the four pillars is a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more cinematic, a little bit more charged. I feel like I took a little bit more ownership or authorship of how the images look and how they feel, as opposed to kind of sort of using or piggybacking the language of documentary photography in a way.
Yeah, what are some of the techniques that you're using to make them feel more cinematic?
So definitely, I mean, I use strobes, right? I use off-camera flashes to give the space this kind of like uncanny charged feeling, right? Sort of create a break with reality. Um, I'm doing that in the community, but for the most part, in the community, it's like I had less control. I was more observing these spaces, and I would set up my lights, right, to actually just light the spaces. And with the four pillars, I'm trying to create more kind of pictorial effects, more drama,
Hmm.
psychology in the pictures themselves. So there's slightly different techniques, different types of light. Um,
Yeah, the drama comes across, especially in these ones with like the black backgrounds and the really bright figures in the foreground.
yeah.
They're definitely dramatic.
I don't know if this is getting like way too technical, but there's a lot more shades of gray in the community, and these photographs and the four pillars have way more stark black and white contrast, which hopefully makes it a little more graphic, a little bit more eye-catching.
Yeah, and that's because of these strobes.
Yeah, the way I'm using it, but also just like what I'm choosing to photograph as well, right? I mean, that's a big part of it as well. Just thinking about what tones you're representing and against what types of backgrounds, right? Photographing at night outside,
Hmm.
the pyramid image you just showed of all the guys climbing on each other.
Yep.
Like choosing a photograph on a black background as opposed to kind of an interior space, it gives it that sort of focus and tension, you know.
Why are you using black and white?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, to me, it creates a space apart from reality, a kind of world or a universe in which the photos are taking place. It's a break with how we see, as are the flashes. So I think the flashes contribute to that as well. I think in color, the photos are a little bit more documentary. They feel a little bit more connected. They feel a little bit more observational. They feel like, oh, this is something happened to see. There's more normalcy. And I think hopefully with the black and white, there's more of a sense of distance, a distance from reality.
Totally. Like for this one, I feel like if this was in color, it would just come across as very sort of like a snapshot, maybe. I mean, there's much more intention here in how you've captured this, but the black and white helps that for sure.
I hope it creates a sense of like defamiliarization, right? These are extremely familiar, mundane spaces, and I think the black and white kind of helps heighten some of maybe the tension or as we said, drama in the pictures.
Yeah. When when you imagine people looking at your work, interacting with your work, what are you hoping that they're taking from
Yeah, well, I mean, I want the pictures to be open-ended enough that like they can have their own experience of it, right? That's not super didactic or prescriptive. We talked a little bit about it the other day, like kind of reactions people are having and like kind of like maybe a confusion. And that to me is good. If it's like a good, productive confusion, if you
Yeah.
go in and you're weirded out a little bit and you think about them for a while, right? And it's like something that sticks in your mind. Again, defamiliarizing sort of the everyday. I think that would be a really positive reaction as opposed to just like either too confused, like the picture, you know, or too simple, right? Personally, I really like photographs that make me have to work as a viewer, where I really have to think and connect them. And so that's sort of what I'm doing as well.
Well, I'll say this about your work. When people come in and if they're initially confused, which most people are because they don't know what they're about to look at, you definitely make it clear that these aren't just random photographs. You're trying to communicate something very specific, and that's immediately understood, even if they're confused about what you're trying to communicate. So you do a good job there for sure. Um, there was somebody who came in. His name's Jerry. I hope that he watches this. Hey, Jerry, if you're listening already. But he was asking about you're meeting with all these different community groups and you've sort of been studying them. Um, we're living through a pandemic. Are you still in touch with some of these community groups? And if so, how are people being affected?
Yeah, I am with some. I mean, it kind of depends. Like some of these groups or communities, um, I photograph over and over again, right? So for those people, I have some form of communication. Or like I read their blogs, you know, or I'm on their, you know, email blasts. Um, and, you know, maybe they follow me on Instagram or something like that. You know, some of the groups are more like I was photographing the Boy Scouts for a while, so it's not like, you know, I'm like keeping tabs on them.
Right.
But so yeah, it depends. I mean, but I do think to speak to the other half of that question, um, you know, when I was making these pictures, right, that were in the community and then that became the four pillars, I think there's something almost antiquated about these spaces. What was going on in these spaces, right? Like if I go hang out in a rec center in 2018, you
Right.
know,
Like
when
this space back here.
yeah, why go to these types of spaces when you could be playing video games or online, you know, or like on your phone? And right, being in these spaces means something very different in the 20 late, you know, in the 21st century than it does by 1970s, right, or 1980s. Um, and but now I feel like looking at them, I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to be back in these spaces. And I think there's like a hunger for these spaces, and people I think do appreciate the importance of being in physical space with people like they took for granted before. I mean, I think, right? I mean, I think there's the idea that the pandemic will totally accelerate everything going virtual, which in some ways it has, but I think it'll also clarify the need to be in spaces with people. And I think people
Right.
really respond for that.
Well, one of the central focuses of the show, I know, is the question that you posed by by participating in these different community groups. We're gaining something from that relationship, and we're also sacrificing from that relationship, sacrificing something in that relationship. Um, I think it's clear now that one of the things that we're gaining is just being near people and having the opportunity to be vulnerable with people and having conversations with people and connecting with people. What are some of the things that, in your eyes, we might be sacrificing?
Well, I mean, I mean, the idea with even the title, right? The four pillars, which comes from that photograph of the flyer, which is a flyer for like a kind of new age workshop class type thing from a group that I photographed for several years. Um, but it's this idea of like, I mean, I think there's a certain self-help ideology that runs through the work, and obviously is very potent in America. This idea of like, what's a path? What do I do? Who do I follow? Right? Or even the image of the martial arts studio, everyone in the parking lot, right? This idea of you have like a sensei, you have
Love
a
this.
mentor, you have someone who you follow, right? And whether it's like a spiritual leader or an idol or something like that. And it's this idea of like maybe sacrificing one's individuality, right? Becoming a part of a group, putting on a uniform, right? Maybe kind of sacrificing a bit of individuality to belong to something, right? To be a
Hmm.
collective movement. And I think there's serious power and value in being a part of a collective movement. I think there's also a kind of a bit of an erasure too of like personal identity in a way, right? That happens. That's the other side of that coin. So I think it's one of those things where it's like there's something to be gained and something to be lost.
Yeah, yeah. I love. You and I were looking at this image the other day, and they're all dressed in these uniforms, except their shoes are all like their little personal touches on the uniform, which I love. You use uniforms a lot in your work. You know, this is a uniform. They're wearing uniforms. These head coverings, uniforms, and a little bit uh, less obvious, but definitely uniforms. What are your ideas on uniforms?
Well, yeah, I mean, I should probably use them less now that you're mentioning it. But no, I mean, I think the idea of a uniform or a costume, like that's the way I think about it. It's like, right, we're all wearing costumes, whether it's more obvious or explicit, right? We all dress in a certain way. These are signifiers um, meant to identify us as part of a specific group or have a specific identity, right? So people read us in a certain way. So again, it speaks to this idea of belonging. I think we were talking about the idea of school uniforms, right?
Hmm.
I mean, as a kid, I would have like very much chafed against the idea of having any sort of uniform, but it's like what is the purpose of that, right? And I think the optimistic reading is that there's a sense of unity, right? A sense of communal identity and belonging
Yeah.
that is created from that, right? That comes from belonging to a group, and that I think speaks to that idea of sort of a little bit of an erasure of one's style or personality or idiosyncrasies in some way, but like the shoes in that image, right? It's like this little bit of individuality like peeking through kind of this more uniform, uh, that everyone is conforming to.
Last question for today, because we want to keep these short, but I this is like sort of a personal question. I know how interested in keeping these two images together you were. Can you talk about why you felt like this was a good pair?
Yeah, I mean, you know, this idea of like a diptych, right? Images that go together. I mean, I think on one hand, there's just like a formal kind of rhyme or inversion happening in these images, right? It's sort of just the black and white. It's happening also in the image on the wall of the shirtless guys and the
These
team
ones.
size, right? It kind of like
Hmm.
this interesting sort of inversion of tones that makes them feel like a whole, like belonging to a whole. So there's that. I mean, I think there's also a thematic connection as well with those photographs. This sort of sad party, right? The cake is meant to signify happiness, celebration, and it's sort of like these empty cakes that really fail.
Yeah.
That they fail at what they're meant to signify. And then these two ambiguous, this crying couple, right? Of like, what's going on, right? What's happened to them? Why are they crying in this very, sort of public way of photograph, right? Which kind of, in a way, is counter to this obviously very personal, intimate thing of like crying with someone.
I can see that. I mean, it's such an important part of your work is the context of the other work. You have to see more than one together to really get a fuller picture of what you're trying to communicate. I think. I mean, I think it adds to it, and that's why your work presents so well in your books. And I think, yeah, the diptychs, the pyramid, and paper here, uh, even formally, there's similarities between those two diptychs.
Yeah, I also think one thing I'll say is that in the book, in the community, it's like, I'll rep it one more time.
It's a
The
good
images,
book.
yeah, the images are more like can function like as standalones. I feel like they can all function kind of like if you took one out, I feel like it would be emblematic of the whole. I
Hmm.
think with the four pillars, I was a little bit more interested in like the meaning created between photographs, right? A meaning being created not just in the image of the cake or of the two people crying, but like the fusion, a certain synergy, right? A kind of like something that happens in between the photographs, a meaning created. So hopefully it becomes more than the sum of its parts, right? Hopefully the pictures make each other better as
Yeah.
opposed to either making each other worse or just replicating the same idea over and over again.
So does that mean that you'll be producing a book called The Four Pillars?
When I make work, in my mind, that is kind of the goal of book. Just because, I mean, I love having a show. I love putting things large and seeing them in a space. Like, I think it just changes the meaning, right? To see an image at 30-40 as opposed to, 8 by 10 inches. But yeah, I think for me, the book format is kind of the end result. It's the
Hmm.
goal. You can create so much meaning. You can create such a narrative and an arc in the book format.
Yeah.
So hopefully.
Yeah. I can't wait for it to come out. Well, Eli, we have an opening for your show tomorrow, Friday. What is that? The 12th. We'll be doing 7 to 9. It's cold out, but and we're only allowing 6 people in the space at a time. We want people masked up. We're going to be taking temperatures when people come here, keeping it safe first and foremost. But if you haven't visited the show yet, it's up until February 27th. I'm going to pan around again. And we have this opening tomorrow night, which is safety is our top priority. But you should really come by and see the show if you haven't been able to have the chance to yet. Um, it's rare to see this style of photography in a gallery setting, and it just feels different. I think that it just comes across um, different printed at these scales and in context with each other. So I hope everyone listening can come by and watch, look at this show. And if you've watched this conversation long enough and you have questions that we haven't gotten to, ask them. And, I'm sure, Eli, you'll be happy to answer anything that I missed.
Oh yeah, well it'll be cold, but I feel like everyone here has a nice winter jacket that they hardly ever get to wear. So just
Yeah, break them out.
bundle up, put on some long underwear or something, and come on out. So it'll be fun.
And you'll be here, right?
I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. That was awesome.
I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, have a good one.
Bye.